to handle those two separate issues that took place, where one, there was a textual insertion and I mean, a lot of talks on text, but in ours we were clearly instructed, despite the many attempts, to add text to the important discussions that we have. So I defer to you, co-chairs. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alvaro. So first of all, let me remind you of the rules of procedure that we negotiated in Luxor, that it was clear that advisors are advisors to the member, but discussions amongst the member themselves, and I'd made it clear when we had agreed to experiment on the breakout groups that the meetings were for TC members only. The advisors could participate as advisors to advise the member, but advisors do not have any role in the rules of procedure in any of our proceedings to speak. It's the members that speak. So that is the rules. We had not set any rules on how we wanted the groups to self-organize. It was in fact an instruction to self-organize, that one group decided to self-organize in a manner and another group in another manner. Well, I'm afraid to say that's not something that we would give an instruction on, and so we respect the decision of whatever groups they decided, and how they decided that, I don't know. We will, Uti and I will speak to the co-facilitators of those groups to get a sense of where they are and how they see progress, and if they've got text, as in this group seemingly had some text, we would have to understand whether text was just adding new issues or whether there was actually any closer sense of a breakthrough, and that would then help Uti and I in the next phase. We continue to, as has been circulated to members via the TC list, the program for the next 4 hours at least was the attempt to make some more further progress on matters related to the fund. Now we are moving to the next hour on the funding arrangements in this setting, in the plenary. We would then assess, depending on how you engage as the TC members on this issue, whether breakout groups would be necessary on these issues, but again, I can't prejudge that. We will then break for a dinner, or for dinner, not a dinner, but for dinner, at 7:30, and we would then reconvene in plenary at 8:30, where we will then open the floor for the next issue that hasn't been resolved, hasn't been addressed so far, which is the location. We will allow for an hour discussion on that, and then again, after that discussion, we will assess whether or not it's feasible or it will be helpful to go into breakout groups. Again, self-organized breakout groups. So that is the mode of work. Once we have then given airtime to all the three parts of our decision text, we will then reassess where we are, I guess, at 8:30 or 9 o'clock this evening, whether or not how we see progress, and we will then inform the committee as to what would then be our next steps. But at this point, I'm not able to suggest how we would work beyond that. It all depends on how we go here. So I hope that clarifies the working method for at least the next 3 to 4 hours on that. So on that matter, Alvaro, let me open the floor to colleagues to comment on the draft text in relation to the funding arrangements. So the floor is open. Heike, and then Avinash. Please go ahead, Heike.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you also for the text and the opportunity. So given the time and that we have also some other important elements of our mandate not yet consolidated, I will be pragmatic on the very important part of our mandate on funding arrangements. So I'm also really happy to provide what I say then in comments in writing, because so far we didn't have enough time to talk about any text, and now we have to be really, I think, focused and pragmatic. So thank you for the text. I think there are some very important elements captured here that we are happy to work with. I would like just to highlight 3 main points. The one is on 109, the United Nations agencies, where really the reporting that we, or the need for transparency of information, we fully acknowledge the need for that. But how it is captured here as formal reporting, we definitely want to see this language changed. Then I think we had in our submission and also building on the Sham decision, very good language that captured...
Sorry, Heike, sorry to interrupt you. So you're not actually speaking to the REV document. So can colleagues please look at the REV document?
The red document?
The REV. There was an updated document sent this morning on the funding arrangements.
I'm told I'm in the right document, where 109 is the United Nations agencies and the multilateral development banks. No? Oh, 110.
110 in the REV document. Weil wir den Punkt eingefügt haben, hat sich die Reihenfolge.
Ja, ja, aber irgendwie mehr, ihr müsst noch was angeben. Das hatte ich schon.
No. 87.
So, in the new document, it's the point 110.
No.
Where instead of, but I can provide the language. So we would rather see, and it's important to have language on information, fully acknowledging the aspects of transparency coming from Avi and others on this point, but change the reporting language here. Are we now in the same text?
No. So what you're referring to in my text is paragraph 77, right? So the Rev 1 starts at paragraph 72 to 87.
So in my text, the funding arrangement, part 3, starts with paragraph 100.
There's a problem with the numbering.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, there's a problem with the printed version, which is why I'm like, what are you talking about? Let me just get this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I fully understand, Richard.
Yeah, okay. I've got it. So it's 109. I was like, okay.
But as I said, I'm very happy to simplify things by sharing the text and to enable co-chairs to work swiftly on that. But just to highlight on 110, the information sharing, we will provide language to really speak to the point of Avi and colleagues on transparency, but have different language than it's captured right now. And then on recommendations, as there's also a placeholder for additional recommendations. So we would like to propose a couple of recommendations, and it's open for discussion, of course. One recommendation would also then refer to the language in the Sham decision in highlighting and speak to important initiatives like the early warning, cruise, SOF, and the Global Shield. The text was in the EU submission, and we can provide it again to co-chairs. Then recommendations on fiscal space, speaking to multilateral development banks, then to relevant actors about anticipatory approaches would be another recommendation that we would definitely want to propose for this part 3. Then also the Pacific Resilience Facility in the context of regional sources, funds, and initiatives, we would like to highlight with a recommendation. And also, as I was speaking to increasing countries' fiscal space through deep debt treatments, common framework for debt treatment, and other elements. You will recognize these recommendations from the submissions we already provided, and happy to share already language on those points.
Great, thank you very much for being brief and to the point. We look forward to receiving those inputs. Heike, I will tell you that I have received some, Heike? I have received some comments from our TC members that have expressed some concerns on the breadth of the recommendations that have been provided on the fiscal space. You know very much well that some of our colleagues have some serious concerns about the TC and the UNFCC sort of impinging on discussions around debt that should be taken elsewhere. So we look forward to receiving your comments, but also just to point out on behalf of members of my constituency that there are some concerns about many of those recommendations that you had proposed around the fiscal space. So what we'll do is we'll pair you up with those colleagues that have issues, and you can work through them and see whether you can find some accommodation on that one. But thank you very much. Avinash, please.
Thank you, Richard. I've got some more of a general comment, which is that I think what we have here is something we can work with. It's in a way that we may not have been very clear what funding arrangements were, maybe a couple of times ago. I still remain concerned, that I think other members on this side are, that we are sort of referencing and invoking other initiatives that may not have a similar eligibility, accessibility, allocation, prioritization as the fund. And so it could be that, here we are endorsing things that actually have a very different access, eligibility, scope, and remit than this fund is intending to, and then different funding as well. And so I think a key theme that we need to have wherever we do that is that the objective here should be alignment. Alignment with the objectives that we are setting out here in terms of our access and eligibility and objectives and scope. So that we're not essentially moving away from what we've agreed is scope, eligibility, and access through these other arrangements that have very different eligibility, scope, access, and are being determined in very different places for which we don't have a presence to. And then I would echo that point that some of the things identified here are best dealt with in other places. As you know, I'm involved in MDB reform, and the spring meetings, the autumn meetings, the G20 has assumed that it is the primary place for reforming MDBs. And so we've got to make sure we understand what we're saying here as to who is taking some of these issues further. Is it the fund? Is it the G20? Whatever. So I think alignment and some focus on where is the best place for these issues to be addressed. Not at all clear it's the fund or funding arrangements in some cases.
Okay, thanks Avinash. So I think one of the important issues that you highlighted is whether we're recommending the COP to endorse any recommendations or not. So again, colleagues, please reflect on that. I think Uchi and I were still struggling. What was the status of these recommendations? Was it endorsing? Was it adopting? Was it taking note of? I think, Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but your submission from TC3 was much more about I guess maybe not taking note, but encouraging people to meet them or something like that. So I don't think we have a common understanding of what it is that we would be proposing on them. Heike, you have your two hands.
Thank you. Just to react immediately to Avinash, Avi. So the language that I will share with co-chairs doesn't include endorse, if that is
okay,
helpful.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's clear, Avinash. Mohammed.
Thank you so much, but unfortunately, I'll be like spoiling the party here, because this section does not fulfill any of the three requirements I asked for. Has to understand convener, who will be sitting there and doing what, and then the follow-up process. What we have here under funding arrangements is a set of recommendations to be taken note of, to be considered, to be put forward. Those are a set of recommendations. Those are not funding arrangements. So this is my first point. We have to have a structure we are creating. We are operationalizing the structure that we agreed to in Sharm el-Sheikh. Operationalizations means similar to the fund. You are creating the operationalization modality. How is it? What is it? Who are they? I mean, like when we say those the funding arrangements, on which criteria do we consider them? Otherwise, I did ask the question last time, is it like 4,000, 5,000? Do we have a threshold number, maximum, the sky is the limit? 2, who's going to convene? I noticed that here you mentioned that the Santiago network might. Santiago network has not even found a place itself. so to consider Santiago network as the convener, this is also bringing this funding arrangements to a much lower level. And 3, what is the follow-up process? So those are 3 main requirements for the African group to see in any funding arrangements to come out. And none of them is reflected here. My second point, and the last point, when I read paragraph 100, and paragraph 101, then I go to paragraph 102, then 103, I'm trying to find the word new and additional finance anywhere, which is the main reason why we created the new funding arrangements. It does not reflect. But what I see here is very interesting: sharing practices, promoting synergies, leveraging comparative advantage. Where is the new additional, mobilizing the new additional finance? So I think the whole thing is being missed in putting forward this structure thing. So I think we need to structure this based on, first, what is the aim of the funding arrangements as reflected in the Sharm el-Sheikh decision, and then who are those ones under the funding arrangements if you have specific criteria, and then who's convening the meetings of the funding arrangements, and then recommendations coming out, and then there's a follow-up process. And then we can have a set of other recommendations which responds to the call of how can we enhance the funding arrangements. Again, I know some colleagues didn't like when I said funding arrangements like elephant in the room. Where is the elephant? Where is the room? It's still, for me, when I read this, still the same thing. So it is a set of recommendations that's very nice. Some of them really go beyond, including this, that the governing bodies should be giving recommendation to the GCF and the GEF and so on. And this is another thing. This is the main task of the Standing Committee on Finance. It is not the task of the TC to mention that. But anyway, just to highlight some of the elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. So I think one of the challenges that we had when we presented this text, that you'll note that up until this point, the funding arrangements were always to be considered in a covering decision, right? What we did in this text was try and, because we're not sure that we're even going to get to a covering decision, right? Can I finish, please? You don't want me to finish? You want to come and check? So previously, the funding arrangements were very much phrased as decision-related text, so there was an action, what have you, and we were concerned that we may run out of time, and therefore we wanted to present we wanted to treat the funding arrangements as the same way we would treat the fund in potential annex. So as we moved from the decision language to the annex, we had to change things so that it made more sense in an annex. So we may have lost some things, and we can go back and we can look at that. And thank you for those additional things. We'll try. Do you want me just to put the African submission and ask people if that's the basis? No. Thank you very much, Mohammed. The next on my list is Mateus.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm trying really to engage constructively on that, but I'm still struggling to understand the overall rationale of the text in front of us. The fundamental question I would like to have answered when I read this text is what elements of the G77 submission to the new funding arrangements were considered in this proposal here. Because I'll go through my comments and then you can answer. My impression, and I share Ambassador Mo's considerations on this, is that very little from our submission was considered. And because of that, it seems that we lose a lot when it comes to process and the opportunity for us to really engage constructively with the new funding arrangements. From the very beginning, at least my delegation and I think all developing countries, we were struggling to understand what the new funding arrangements were. I think we made a huge step in TC3 when we started engaging on that specifically. But it seems that, to me, these recommendations, again, are not targeted because we don't know who we're talking to and what we're talking about. So on paragraph 100, I share Ambassador Mo's comment on the very fact that this paragraph is changing what we agreed in Sharm el-Sheikh. I understand that even the G77 submission, we talked about the leveraging comparative advantages, sharing best practices, but at least in my conception, the new funding arrangements would not be only about that. The key and core element of funding arrangements would be, which is in the Sharm decision, leveraging new additional resources to developing countries to respond to loss and damage, and this is not captured there. So it's a problem that we're seeing on this paragraph. Also, touching on what my colleague Avinash has also mentioned on the idea of endorsing, I understand, Heike, that the language that you're putting forward does not utilize the verb endorses. But when we go through a very extensive listing of initiatives that, as Avinash mentioned, we are not part of and that we did not take due consideration during their decision process, it seems that the COP that you envisage, the COP and the CMA and parties to the convention and to the Paris Agreement really endorsing those initiatives in which we don't necessarily have a say. So our question is how to really make those two worlds come together and in a constructive manner by addressing the two elements of the Sharm decision. This is not clear for me. So there's language on 104 on the funding arrangement partners. Who are those partners? Are those the ones that are going to be represented in the dialogue, or the many initiatives that you're referencing to in this proposal? On paragraphs 106, for example, there's a reference to especially prearranged finance. This was very, we discussed this very thoroughly throughout the TC meetings. In many of the developing countries, TC members raised their concerns on the role of prearranged finance, although they acknowledged the relevance, but framing this as especially prearranged finance is basically not, is disregarding what we have talked about before. I also agree, and I think this was raised before by our colleague Haja, on the role of the WIM and the Santiago network. Ambassador Mohammed also touched on that, which is we're definitely not in favor here of, at least in the way that is referred to, on the role of the Santiago network. We do believe that we have to build upon that work, but we should also be aware of the boundaries of the mandate of the Santiago network and the WIM-XCOM. So how to reflect that precisely would be something that we can work on, but the way that it is phrased in 108, 113 is just too prescriptive to the very mandate of those two processes under the convention. And my final comment would be that we definitely not support what is written in paragraph 114 on urging countries to include non-economic losses and damage in national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions. This is not for this process to do so. We were one of the few members that I could say championed the idea of non-economic losses and damage throughout the discussions, but I do not see this specific process on the fund and the new funding arrangements given guidance on the development of NAPs, and the Cs. I think this we're encroaching upon other processes and other discussions that are ongoing in the Paris Agreement. So again, I'm open to discussing. Really, I would really like to see also involvement, engagement of developed countries on our proposal on having a clear process. I understand their concerns around criteria, but we can work on how to make the proper linkages and the proper predictable process for us to really engage with the new funding arrangements. Also, in light of what Mohammed has said, Ambassador Mo has said on the need to follow up the process as well. I think if we are to give recommendations, we need to follow up those recommendations as well. So this is also really important for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. So yes, all the submissions were considered. I guess if you don't see your text, it's because we didn't believe there was consensus on it, but you're welcome to reinsert those paragraphs. That's this exercise. What's in here is not co-chairs drafting. These were things that were submitted to people. Yeah, I mean, we've heard you clearly on that one. There were expressed views of concern around the G77 submission, but again, you can reinsert them and we'll negotiate them here. That's what this is a basis of to move discussions forward. So thank you for that. Next is Jaime. Colleagues, can I just ask you to we do have to take everybody and we have to go to dinner. So thank you very much, Jaime, followed by Hadija, Diane, Christina, Heike, and Adele, and then Angela. So Jaime.
Thank you, Richard. On Mo's three comments on convener and the what and the follow-up, I think that convener, what's not in this text and fell out, is the high-level council. There can be something to reconsider to see if we can create some sort of structure on this outer world, outside of our little bubble here, actions that are very relevant to loss and damage. So that might be a thing to bring it all together. And because there is a connection of it, and we can't say that everything is outside of UNITRC doesn't count and we don't have any influence, and etc. We have to take into account all the possible sources, and that's also the mandate of this thing. On the what, that's what the list is, and on the follow-up, there's paragraph, I think, 110 that talks about reporting. Now, specifically on the concrete suggestions on paragraph 100. We would like to change channels to sources, funds, processes, initiatives under and outside the convention, which is part of the Sharm decision. On paragraph, and we'll put it in writing as well, on paragraph 105C, to be more inclusive and to ensure that we don't miss the relevant organizations, change to relevant UN agencies, intergovernmental and regional organizations, and bilateral, multilateral, and international financial institutions. So that might be more inclusive to see that we capture the whole spectrum. And we support Heike with the addition of Global Shield. I think all the good initiatives that were recently joined in the funding arrangements should be mentioned and supported like that. On paragraph 110, that's the reporting one, we'd like to change funding to information on efforts on assisting developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, to support also the suggestion that Germany made. What we're missing in this whole thing, and Mo and I have been pushing for this, is the humanitarian sector and working on the nexus between humanitarian and reconstruction. And we will send some suggestions in writing, including on migrants, climate-induced migration. But actually, I would like to add the word refugee as well. 80% of refugees live in the area where they come from, so just across the border. And most conflict areas are also climate-sensitive areas, so they continue to live in climate-sensitive areas, but in more stable neighboring countries, and they're in high risk for redisplacement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime. Please, would you send that as soon as possible? So if we get to work on it later, we have that text. Thank you. Haja, please go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. I want to support first Ambassador Moore and Matthias' points on 100, on the paragraph 100, that we wanted the funding arrangement to be complementary with the fund in order to reach the scale of the problem that we are facing, and to also to ensure that we're not duplicating efforts and there's new and additional finance, and to ensure that there is a cohesion and coordination among all the relevant actors in the loss and damage space. So I think that needs to be reflected. And as I mentioned before, in paragraph 104, I would like to change the suggest to change the dialogue to the high-level council, and also for this council to meet annually. And it has to be convened at a higher level, and it can be co-convened by the COP or the UN Executive Secretary and the Secretary General. We have said this before as well. And the point of this high-level council is to actually to keep the political pressure and to encourage to scale up the resources, because we're doing all of this to create the fund and funding arrangement to actually create a future that is in compliance with the 1.5 world and beyond. So it has to be very big, and to do big things you need the political will as well. So we have the space for the technical coordination, but we also need this at the higher level to reflect the ambition of what we are trying to achieve. So there is this point that's very important for us. And we really want to encourage on the fact, on the part E of 104, I believe, because I'm mixed up with the documents a little bit. But anyway, the part that says that the WIM has a role of convening, we really stress that it has to be the COP. And there is a place, as my previous speakers from our constituency has spoken as well, there is a place and role for the technical committees in the convention already. And we all want to coordinate on all these aspects, but on this specific one, the role for the high-level council is to ensure that there is a political will, that we mobilize resources, we reach the scale, we actually achieve the capitalization, and we change the SOPs of the main actors, which Jaime also just mentioned who the main actors could be. But just to ensure that we deal with the 1.5 world and beyond, because that is coming much sooner than we want to imagine. So thank you.
Thank you, Haja. Yes, we've taken note of your previous comments, but again, also if you have that in writing, please send it to us so that we can reflect it in the next draft if we have one. Dan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. I think when I'm looking at this, it's like we have a lot of ideas just thrown into a particular order. It's not written in a way that is like arrangement and language for the COP already. So I think that is can be a little bit confusing. So with that in mind, I was just thinking that the idea is to have the fund with arrangements. So we have to have a way of connecting the fund with the arrangements. So I think the first thing to do could be to consider is start with paragraph 104, which basically say we're going to connect with this council or body that is going to convene all of these stakeholders somewhere below. And I think it should be written, and then they will be mandated to ensure that they can meet certain things. So the certain things that they could meet could then be a listing of all of the agencies. We can summarize the listing of the agencies in a much more general way so that we can expand the list over time, so we're not constrained to a fixed list. And then further throughout the text, you have when they convene, what will they be talking about? So we have quite a few things that's in here that they'll be talking about. and including non-economic losses and stuff like that, which is an unusual thing that we've been adding to the list. So maybe just to there's a lot in here. I'm just suggesting to start with, we're going to have this event. Now, on the frequency of the event, I don't mind having the annual event, but I think because of the nature of the loss and damage, maybe it would be good to have regional events. And that will allow greater participation of indigenous people. Everybody can fly to one big event. So maybe it would be good to get regional events leading up to the one big event at the end of the year. So I think if we can restructure it that way, I think it will flow a little bit better and then it will be much more acceptable. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think that's a really good idea. I think the G77 actually, the submission of G77 and TC3 actually had, in my view, although I'm very biased on this one, of course, but had the inherent logic that someone had to be in charge, right? And that logic was not the council, it was the fund. The fund was given the task of the coordination and the convening, and then there was the higher level council issue. So I think we stuck on that because there didn't seem to be consensus then, and maybe not now, but maybe colleagues can think about, like, we have to give an operational mandate to somebody to convene, coordinate, make recommendations, and lead, and then the council comes out at a much higher order. So that would be the logical thing. So thank you, Dan. We'll look at that restructuring. I think on regional events, maybe we make a suggestion that this could be taken up as part of the Climate Week process or what have you. I think there's just an oversaturation of events, and so I think we would, so somebody has to take that decision.
Richard, sorry, let me just state that I'm not asking for anything new, so we can participate in all the regional climate events and so on, not anything new.
No. But that makes sense. I think we'll look at that in our next iteration. Next is Christina, Adal, Angela, Jean-Christophe, Mohammed, Jean-Christophe, and then I have Heike and Mo that want to come back. So, Christina.
Thank you, Richard. And I just want to thank the co-chairs for creating this space today to have this textual discussion and textual negotiations over the funding arrangements. I was going to say the funding arrangements annex, because I'm assuming that this would be an annex to the draft decision. And I think part of what's challenging for me is that because there's no accompanying draft decision text, we're looking at recommendations that are floating without first also talking about what would be the frame for the decision. But that said, in our view, which I've shared before, when we get to this question about welcoming or endorsing, the view we had was in the decision text, it would be an invitation to sources, funds, processes, and initiatives under and outside the Convention of Paris to take on improvements. I don't have the exact language in front of me. It was in our submission for TC3, including, but not limited to, what's in this annex. And if it helps to say to this discussion of, I don't think what we put in this annex is exhaustive. And so for me, the recommendations here would be a non-exhaustive list of recommendations. I would agree, and I've said this before, that there should be a way to have a continued process, or as others have said, follow-up, because if what's in the recommendations is not a non-exhaustive list, it's a moment of time that we're capturing from discussions this year. There should be a process to keep the conversation, keep the discussion, keep the dialogue, keep all of those things. So had voiced the other day support for the council as a way to do that. Also supported what I'd seen in previous iterations, I'm not even sure if it's in the current one, for the fund to also create a platform for exchange. Right, so I see it as non-mutually exclusive to have those two ways. In terms of, there are a couple of textual pieces, some of which Jaime has already covered, like in paragraph 100, it should follow the SHARM language. Channels wasn't part of it, so let's keep our lives simple and just use the SHARM language. Same support what Jaime suggested with paragraph 105. It says I here, which I'm not sure is the right one. But shortening the list so that it's not such a long list. We would want to see included in M of that same 105, where it talks about experts on loss and damage, including those from civil society, indigenous peoples, and the philanthropic sector.
Christina, I think you're on the wrong version.
I don't know.
That's
what
okay.
version. I thought I was on the right version.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't. I will send to the co-chairs if
Okay,
that's the
thank you
most
very
helpful. I did want to add there were some recommendations that we had put in our proposal that are not in here. There were a lot in our original proposal, so I'm only going to read 3. One is about, and I'll share this in writing, but one is about relevant actors and contributors are urged to scale up anticipatory approaches through mechanisms such as the Central Emergency Response Fund, Disaster Response Emergency Fund, START Network, country-based pools, and humanitarian appeals. That's the first one. The second is multilateral climate finance institutions and funds are encouraged to promote in their funded activities the inclusion of refugees and consistent with existing investment results framework and funding windows and structures. And then the third is, and I understand, you don't need to respond to me on this, Richard. I heard you, I'm preempting your response to me. Increasing countries' fiscal space through timely and sufficiently deep debt treatments through the common framework for debt treatment beyond the debt service suspension initiative for those eligible or other multilateral broad-based debt treatment processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, taking away my thunder. Thank you very much. Anyway, thank you for that. We look forward to seeing your submission. Colleagues, I just also want to make an announcement that our colleague Manjit, representing the LDCs, had to leave for his flight, and we have received confirmation from the regional group chair, the LDC group chair, Madeleine Saar, that Hafiz would replace him for the rest of the meeting. So Hafiz, welcome back to the seat here the other day. So if you're wondering why he's back, that's the reason why. So thank you very much. Next on my list is Adele, followed by Angela, followed by Jean-Christophe.
Thank you very much, Richard. I just want to support the statement expressed by Ambassador Mohan, also I think supported by Matthias, with regard to some critical issues that are still missing here. If I link the proposed language here, let's say 100, para 100, to the decision that we had at COP27, it doesn't really link strongly. Complementarity is there, and it's key, and new and additional is also there. And it should be followed by how to address the real loss and damage, how to respond real loss and damage affected by the impact of climate change. It's missing there. Slow onset events, economic and non-economic loss and damage, it's missing there. And when it comes to coordination issues, I think it's 102. This coordination is good one, but it needs to be linked directly to the fund, whether it will be fund board that we are going to establish or not, but it should be linked to fund. So complementarity will be complementarity to the fund itself, and also complementarity to the existing assistance that they have, let's say from humanitarian assistance and other out there, inside or outside the convention. I think that's very good. So there should be a coordination mechanism. I think that was also mentioned by Arti. I think that's very good. So coordination needs to be elaborated. In what way the existing mechanism could link to the new fund that we are going to establish. We have it's already established, but we are going to operationalize. I think that's critically important. That's how we understand coordination complementarity issues. And again, 103 with regard to Santiago Network. Santiago Network is addressing, let's say, catalyzing technical assistance. So this is so broad. If this is addressing catalyzing technical assistance for addressing loss and damage, that's fine. But this is quite broad. And the WIM, Warsaw International Mechanism, I think what I mentioned yesterday was communication issues, reporting issues that the complementarity bodies have done at grassroots level needs to be communicated to the Conference of Parties through the report of EXCOM, WIM EXCOM. That was my point. So I think this is not really reflecting the points that we raised previously. And in terms of pay arrangement, we also do note this. I think we really don't know about pre-arrangement. This is part of adaptation or this part of loss and damage. And para 108, I think Santiago Network is purely there, but we really need to be sure that Santiago Network, its involvement is addressing real loss and damage. How to provide, let's say, technical assistance on addressing real loss and damage. It's not too clear for my side. And of course, National Adaptation Plan and also NDCs, I think that's quite outside of our loss and damage discussion. So I think we really need to be focused on the addressing issue of stream events and slow onset events linking to economic, non-economic loss and damage. And of course, it could be coming up with a reconstruction, rehabilitation, and recovery issues. So it could be very close to the fund. So how to bring together the existing assistance that can be feeding into the decision that we have at COP27. So with that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you very much, Adao. Next is Angela, followed by John Christoph. Angela, please.
Thank you very much, Richard. And first of all, just let me highlight that I fully support the comments made by most of the G77 colleagues in the sense that it's important to have some kind of criteria. At this point, for us, it's still quite vague in terms of what are the funding arrangements, who are the partners, what we want to achieve, how they can deliver, how can we track progress. Those are general comments. And I think that if we do not solve that, we will never get the funding arrangements or clarity in terms of what we want to achieve. Of course, we are open to continue our discussion in order to, reach an agreement on this regard. But at least let me highlight some other points in terms of the paragraph that we have in front of us. Paragraph 104, there is no clarity as to who the partners are. I think it was mentioned by Mateus and other colleagues. So this is very key for us. So that's why we mentioned the need of a criteria, and it was submitted in our comments as G77, paragraph 114. I mentioned before that the relationship with NAPS and the non-economic losses doesn't make sense for us. So one thing is adaptation, the other thing is loss and damage. So I don't see what is the relationship. And on the other hand, non-economic losses is not considered well in the document, just in this paragraph, but then in the rest of the document, we don't see any kind of references. And as I mentioned before, NAPS is not related to non-economic losses. In terms of paragraph 113 and the relationship with WIM, I just want to highlight that I see a role of the WIM as part of the funding arrangements, but perhaps we do not need to be very prescriptive because it's up to the COP to decide what are the recommendations to the WIM. So if we have it a paragraph that is more general, could be much better, and we can encourage somehow that the women engage in the process of the fund through the work streams that we have, but without being very specific, because I think the relationship is only with the SOE, and the WIM also deals with action and support, non-economic losses, and other areas that are useful for the work that we are doing here. So just let me highlight that, and I think that is very important, at least to have some reference of criteria, because otherwise we will never understand what we are talking about here in funding arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. So I guess you've made a change to your flight booking, so you're here with us? You're staying with us. Good. So then I want to ask you if you wouldn't mind providing some text on the WIM thing, because you're closer to that than we are, and so it would be really helpful if you could help us frame that WIM relationship. And then the second one is a question to you about assuming we agree on who leads the funding arrangements or at the operational level, what have you, and assume we agree that there needs to be criteria. Would you be happy that criteria, that process is mandated to somebody to develop that wouldn't necessarily affect any recommendations in here? So if there were funding arrangements or recommendations in here, we would accept them at this stage, and then we would mandate to whoever body that further development, or are you suggesting that until we have the criteria, we can't further establish? So that's just a question for you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Richard. My expectation was to discuss the criteria, but considering that we don't have time, that we have to leave, perhaps somehow mandate someone, I don't know. We need to discuss with my constituency, but just someone can develop any kind of criteria that could give us the assurances that who are we talking to and what are the expectations, when they are going to report, how they can join the process. Because my concern with the funding arrangement is that, a funding arrangement could be whatever we want. And I feel concerned that we can say, an NGO who's working on adaptation, she can say, or the NGO can say that is working on loss and damage, when the main focus is on adaptation. So that's my main concern. So we need to have any criteria, somehow, some criteria. And I know that at this point it's quite difficult, but we need to see some kind of paragraph that could give us the assurance that a criteria will be developed for further work. I think that's the only question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's very useful. So colleagues also reflect on whether we can have a sequence to further consideration to tighten up the funding arrangements. Angela, you want to come back?
Yeah, I forget to mention one thing. As we see, and I think most of G77, I think it's a G77 position, we see a key role of the fund, coordinating the funding arrangements, and it should be well reflected here, because we do not see someone else doing that. So in order to have coherence, coordination, effectiveness, and efficiency of the funding arrangements, we need the fund playing the key role on that. Thank you.
Yes, I recall that very strongly in the G77 position, but again, you need to engage with our colleagues on developed countries who didn't necessarily, at least at this stage, didn't see that being that clear. So colleagues from developed countries, let's have a conversation over dinner whether or not your positions are changing to be more flexible, to give some kind of a role to the fund beyond what we have in the clean text. That would be very useful. Thank you, Angela, and you'll give us the text later on the WIM thing. So. Jean-Christophe, you're next on my list. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. So, let me start by saying that this part of our recommendation is really paramount to me. Paramount to me for two reasons that are clearly inside the mandate of SHARM. First, SHARM asks us to develop a recommendation to operationalize the funding arrangements. So in this perspective, it's important, like Avinash and Mateusz said, that we are careful with the wording we use, actually, if we want really to be operational. And I'm happy to hear from Eike that you are going to change the verb endorse by another one. But there is a second reason, actually, in addition to this one, which is already quite compelling. This is that we are also asked to ensure complementarity and coherence. And so we have not only to design a fund that is able to cooperate, but also to call on others to cooperate with this fund, and even to be a little bit more specific on the way that could be done. And let me also remind everyone that the funding arrangement, we are already touching on this aspect in the fund part of our recommendation in two sections. First, in the Secretariat section, when we call on the Secretariat to engage with other parties of the mosaic, and also in the complementarity and coherence section, the paragraph 73 and 74, where we make clear that the fund is the one which has to ensure coherence at the ground level, but also which would be able to leverage money and capacity from the funding arrangement. So we have to look at our set of recommendations, including this part here, and this is a globality. We have a part more operational on the fund, in the fund section, and we have to have, in a way, some counterpart directed directly to the funding arrangement. This is to answer your call, which I share, actually. We have to be operational in that. We can't, leave the impression that this is only a minor issue. No, it is not. It is not at all. And to answer Mateusz, very good question about who are these funding arrangements. I think we have already answered that in paragraph 105, when we list a first set of actors, which could be part of the annual gathering around the fund. But also, I think it's important to consider that the creation of the fund would attract other actors that are not listed there, with the interest to better respond to the need of countries, vulnerable countries, in their response to loss and damage. So for this reason, I would encourage all of you to consider this part of a key element of the recommendation. I mean, there could be some modification. There are maybe some recommendations that we could withdraw because they are not up to the challenge, actually, we want to take on. But most of them are very important in order to mobilize the rest of the mosaic in order to work with the fund itself. Finally, let me tell you that I have another recommendation to propose. I will send that to the co-chair. It's building on the monthly Macron Summit, the Paris Pact for Planet and People, and it's with the objective to increase the fiscal space for the most vulnerable country. So I will send that to the co-chairs. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. Again, so that we look forward to that recommendation, but let me also note on behalf of some members of my constituency that they have some serious concerns around referencing, they generally welcome the Paris Summit, but it's not a multilateral process, and so there have been concerns raised with me. I'm just conveying those, and I would encourage you to engage with some people in my constituency that have issues with that over dinner. I'm not going to I just convey that concern. So thank you, colleagues. Last on my list for new speakers is Albara, and then after that I have repeat offenders, Mo, Heike, and Christina. So Albara.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and also thanks to colleagues for highlighting their points here. It made it easier for me. I will not repeat the points that were mentioned by Matthias, Angela, and Ambassador Mohammed and Adaw. I fully agree to all the points that they have mentioned, but I will speak to further points and send them to you in writing. On paragraph 100, I agree fully to Ambassador Mohammed and Matthias and many other speakers that we certainly agree to the complete difference between this and and the decision in Sharm. On 114, I don't think it's appropriate to be giving instructing parties on their NDCs and NABs. I think that this is the essence of NDCs to be a bottom-up approach and take into account also national priorities and national circumstances. On 110, I would ask for the deletion of this paragraph. I'm not sure what these reports entail and what purpose they would serve, and therefore I don't see it appropriate to be part of this. On 107, to also ask the deletion of this paragraph. I'm not sure what purpose this paragraph serves, and it's a statement to me rather than a recommendation. And it's too perspective. We can definitely work on it and find ways and means. But the way it is not something that we can work on. And also, I wanted to highlight that for us, from our point of view, the dialogue convened by the fund would be named a dialogue and not a council. It's something that we were very keen on highlighting. On 105, to add to the sub-bullets that will be representing the fund, I believe that the appropriate sub-bullet would reflect representatives of the members of the board of the fund rather than representatives of the fund. I will leave it at this again, and I will come back to you on future comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Albara. We look forward to those written comments. Mo.
Thank you so much. Very quick questions. First, do I need to resubmit the submission that we had before, so you re-acknowledge it, or should you already consider it? Because you didn't consider it here. Don't answer me until I finish. So this is one thing. The second thing, I'm happy when I look at paragraph 105, which is almost everything under the sun, and then we are requesting, even if you say relevant UN agencies, this is like, I don't know, like 50, 60, and then you have all the rest. Who's going to pay for that? It's a question for colleagues who are very strong in not having criteria, and not having convener, and not having a platform, and not creating that. So we need to look also at the budgetary implications. And then again, here is a mix of two things: mix of what when this arrangement funding the one step ahead of them and recommending to them, or recommending on their behalf on something. And then the last thing, many of the recommendations that are put there, including those that many have referred to paragraph 110, when you require the UN agencies and the MDBs and the bilateral agencies to include in their annual reports the funding for loss and damage. Okay, this is fine. And then who's going to provide the report for us back? I mean, those are scattered. They live in a different universe. They are not part of our format. So someone has to do this part. That's why we are very keen on, in our submission as Africa, there is a board as a convener. That need more resources, but just to highlight this point. And those are the ones who will be always providing us reports, because this is the entity under the UNFCCC who deals with us and provides us with the report. So those are elements. What I'm seeing here is very nice funding arrangements, elephant in a room, which I don't know where the room is, what is the elephant, but it looks nice. So please consider, do I need to resubmit? Okay, thank you so much.
No. So Mohammed, when colleagues are submitting text, they're actually trying to insert text onto this one, right? So we're not asking for submission. So if there are elements of your submission that you want to see reflected in here, rather than just sending me a whole submission, try and reflect where there are elements that you think we have not included. May I finish, please? Not included into this text, because we're building on this text. If you want everything in, then we'll put everything in. But we would prefer that you help us by if there's a paragraph that's not specific on convening and you want the fund to convene, then add in the fund board should convene, and that would be more helpful to us, particularly at this late hour. Thank you. Do you want to come back?
This thing is not structured. This is like a flow of things behind each other. You need to have subheadings. So you need to have convener, then you need to have platform, then you need to have a mandate. I mean, those are sub-elements or subheadings that we have in our submission as Africa. So you can use it as guidance for you. And then take our submission, then add to it other submissions. Thank you.
Then you'll come and shout at me that I didn't consider your thing. So, okay, fine. You'll leave it to our discretion, then that's okay. Thank you very much. I have Heike and then Christina, and then we'll break for supper. Heike, please.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, colleagues. I heard many things on funding arrangements where we are happy to engage, where I can relate to, also to the points mentioned on NAPS. I'm looking at Angela and Matthias, so I can relate to your comments and happy to go back to this recommendation and look into it, and also others from colleagues. I must admit also, non-engagement on concrete recommendations was so far, but I will have a smiling face nevertheless, but just to say, so my approach to this is, it's part of our mandate. It's important. I heard colleagues like Hadja, Diane, and even sometimes Mo speaking about the funding arrangements in reality, the humanitarian nexus and others, not being perfect, not being enough on scale, not being perfect on coordination and collaboration, and certainly the alignment, the coordination with the fund is an important element. But please, don't go in circles and hindering us from making progress here. And please acknowledge also that this text was the very latest that we received, like in the afternoon, or when was it? And so, nevertheless, we all engage in good faith to make progress, and I'm not going back to structure here and structure there, because then we don't have a chance to finalize this text. But on the 2 points also, Richard, that you asked us about, that came up in the discussion now, but let me say also on coordination, as I said many times, I'm also very positive on acting on the Council. Moving forward with the Council. Also, UNGA is annual possibility to convene all the different funding arrangements. But our mandate and also the Sham decision text is very clear on coordination and coherence. And the mosaic is not about copying one piece and making everything else inside and outside UNFCCC the same. So the notion of criteria that everybody has to fit in the same standard, I think this is not answering to different needs and different also added value of different initiatives and actors in the landscape inside and outside UNFCCC. So the notion of criteria and also the fund leading on everything is not something that I can support. But many other elements on transparency and others, I'm willing to engage and find language and put my trust in the co-chairs to accommodate all those. And sorry, I forgot one important element on also the relations with the fund and strengthening collaboration and coordination is the concept of partnerships that we also introduced in our submission, and that would really be one key instrument with the fund in a very important role to structure these partnerships and guide these partnerships that we could use to bring this landscape forward.
Thank you, Heike. So I had the misfortune for the first time in my life having to go to UNGA this year, and I'm glad that I went because it's the last time I'll ever go. I think it's just chaotic, right? I think the notion of having everybody there is great, but Unga itself is just a very difficult place. On this issue of criteria, I mean, I would encourage colleagues to talk to each other because I'm not quite sure we're using criteria in the same manner. So I don't think that the G77 proposal is like restrictive criteria that you would have to go apply to something like you apply to get a credit card and you have to prove and then they say yes or no, right? I think it's more a concern. I think Angela raised a concern that activities might be purely adaptation activities that are being relabeled as loss and damage, and it creates a false impression that certain you have to have X amount of money and or what have you, or you have to have proved consultation. So I'm not seeing the G77 saying that, but it'd be useful to have a conversation with Angela and Mo, who are very who are saying this is really important. So thank you very much. The last speaker now is Christina, and then we'll break. So Christina, please go ahead.
Richard, thank you. It was actually on this very topic, so apropos. I fully appreciate the concerns that are being raised, and Angela, the concern you raised about NGOs doing adaptation and being concerned that, you know, it would be too expansive. So I wanted to suggest a proposal, perhaps a bridging one, that might address that concern. And I wonder if the way to deal with this issue is to make clear that the funding arrangements, which I consider the whole slew of words, right? Sources, funds, initiatives, and processes under and outside the Convention and Paris Agreement, just in terms of defining what funding arrangements are, that they would be those that are responding to economic and non-economic loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change, including extreme weather events and slow onset events. And we could talk about ongoing and ex post. This is language that I'm pulling from paragraphs 17 and 18 in part 2 that could also be reflective of what we're talking about with respect to sources, funds, initiatives, and processes under and outside the Convention in Paris that is in addition to the fund. If those words, responding to economic and non-economic loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change, including extreme events and slow onset events, and having that ongoing and the word ex post there, I wonder if that's enough to make clear that we are not talking about, for example, an NGO doing adaptation.
Okay, thank you very much for that proposal. So Angela, Mo, others in the G77, when you reflect on that over dinner and you can come back and what have you. So thank you very much, colleagues. So that's our first attempt at looking at the funding arrangements. We'll get back to you on what the next steps are. So we're going to break now until 8:30 p.m. There will be dinner served, I'm assuming same venue as last night. So back at, I would like to have a G77 and China coordination meeting in this room at 8:30, and we'll start at 9 o'clock. So Uti, it's up to you if you want to constitute a meeting or you want your colleagues just to have an extra half an hour. That's your... so, and then when we come back at 9 p.m., we will start with the consideration of the Part 1 paper on the institutional location. And then at some point after that conversation, Uti and I will tell you what our next steps are. So eat some dinner, enjoy yourselves. Don't stay away from the alcohol. I don't know if it's going to help us tonight, but I don't know. Maybe it will. Anyway, thank you very much, colleagues. We'll see you at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, depending on your proposal. Thank you. Have a good dinner.